Okay. So thank you again for being here with us with the Conservation Foundation this evening. And for anyone who's just getting to know us and isn't really familiar with the Conservation Foundation and what we do, we are a nonprofit organization. We're proud to be accredited by the Land Trust Accreditation Commission. And our mission is to improve the health of our communities by preserving and restoring natural areas and open spaces and protecting rivers and watersheds and promoting stewardship of our environment. This work is very important in preserving our quality of life. Open space improves our air quality, preserves wildlife habitat, and creates opportunities for people to enjoy the outdoors. And open space along rivers and streams protects water quality and our drinking water. And we're going to be learning more about that this evening and how to keep our rivers clean. We'd like to thank Itasca Bank and Trust for sponsoring this webinar. Our sponsors, like Itasca Bank, help us to keep these webinars free for everyone. Please contact us for information if you're interested in sponsoring, and I will be posting our contact information and links for our sponsors' website in the chat and on YouTube when we post the recording. You, our friends and viewers, can also help us to keep these webinars free. If you enjoy the webinars, we encourage you to please make a donation to help the Conservation Foundation continue to do all the wonderful things we do, including and in addition to our webinars. Also, you can become a member. And when you become a member, you will enjoy a wide variety of members-only offerings. And with 2022 being the 50th anniversary of the Conservation Foundation, we have some really fun things happening this year. We still have a few months left this year with a lot of good activities that you can join us for. You can also follow us on social media as well to learn more and stay updated on events and happenings. And I will also be posting the link for upcoming events. But I have a few that I'm going to share, just a quick preview of, give you a little quick description. And again, I'll post the links so you'll have more information on these different upcoming events. But just a quick mention, our next monthly webinar is on the evening of September 7th, Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. The topic next month is community connection and fun on the farm. We'll join the Conservation Foundation's Jason Holm, who is our Green Earth Harvest Farm Manager, to learn about local community in how the local community in the middle of the Chicago suburbs is able to experience a bit of the farming lifestyle and have fun and make great friends along the way. And we also have coming up, if you'd like to experience a bit of that farm lifestyle, we invite you to join us for a day at the farm at our Dixon Merced Farm location in Montgomery, Illinois. On Sunday, August 28th from 9 to 4 p.m. We're going to have farm demonstrations, antique tractors, children's activities, and face painting, and all kinds of fun that day. And you can also stop here at the farm at McDonald Farm in South Naperville for our farm stand on Wednesday evenings from 3 to 6 p.m. and on Saturday mornings from 9 a.m. until noon from now through late October to get your fresh local organic produce. If you're local to this area, we'd love to see you. And then also in September, coming up next month with school being back in session, the kids probably needing a bit more of that outdoor time in nature again. Don't miss our after school youth program, Club Nature, on Thursday afternoons from 4 to 5:30. And then coming up September 17th is It's Our Fox River Day. And so that's definitely relevant to our topic for this evening. Alex will give you a couple more details about that, and I'll post information for the website so you can learn a lot more about that, because I'm sure this is a topic that you would be interested in. So for this evening's river topic, I'm going to introduce the Conservation Foundation's own Alex Handel. And he's an environmental scientist and the perfect person to talk to us about keeping our rivers clean. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Alex, and I'll come back at the end to help with questions.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out to join us. I'm glad you could be with us digitally, even though maybe not in person. My name is Alex Handel. I've been with the Conservation Foundation for a little over 2.5 years now as their environmental scientist, working with the watershed team. Most of my work involves the 3 watershed groups that we staff: the DuPage River Salt Creek Workgroup, the Lower DuPage Watershed Coalition, and the Lower Des Plaines Watershed Group. So I spend a lot of my time doing the field work, as well as working on projects and studies kind of like this one here. So the DRSCW conducted a non-point source feasibility analysis looking at reducing phosphorus in our rivers. This was done in collaboration with Baxter and Woodman, so thanks to them. So the objective of our study, we are in agreement with wastewater treatment plants and the Illinois EPA to find ways to reduce phosphorus input in our watersheds, both from point source and non-point source discharges. So that's where this study comes in, focusing on the non-point source phosphorus. We're required to investigate measures that can remove the dissolved oxygen impairments, as well as remove offensive condition impairments, and to meet some of the legal requirements that they have. So we decided that we would look at leaf litter based on a USGS study from 2016 that indicates organic matter is a main contributor of phosphorus within urban watersheds. And if you've ever been anywhere around any of our watersheds, they're pretty heavily urbanized. So our objective was to evaluate the impact of area street sweeping on leaf litter management practices that are currently ongoing on the non-point source loadings of total phosphorus. We want to see what we're currently doing, how much phosphorus there is, and then what we can do to optimize the processes that are already in place. So our study area includes the 4 watershed basins that are serviced by the DRSCW and the lower DuPage watershed group. The lower Des Plaines group is not a part of this study, although they are doing their own very similar study that covers the same stuff. But so we're focused on the DuPage River and Salt Creek. It's an area of approximately 530 square miles with 104 communities, townships, and agencies that all sort of have a hand in this street sweeping leaf litter process. And it represents about 8.8 square miles of row. Row just stands for right-of-way, and it's the term we use to catch all for all the streets and roads and highways and everything that gets driven on. So for this study, we started with a literature review to get a grasp on what sort of expectations we could look out for, looking at what current leaf litter practices are. We looked at some interesting papers that talked about differences in tree species and how it relates to the phosphorus leaching, as well as street sweeping practices, and then leaching rates depending on weather. We also sent out a questionnaire to all of those agencies that we mentioned earlier to see what sort of practices were already in place and to collect data that we would then later use for our GIS analysis and our Minnesota Pollution Control Agency street sweeping tool, which is a lot to say. So starting with our questionnaire, it was based off of a Wisconsin MS4 leaf management survey. So that was a survey they sent out to a subset of their treatment plants to collect information on what they were doing. We sent our survey to 75 DRSCW and LDRWC communities, 16 townships, 4 agencies, and we got a little over half of those agencies responded to us, but that does represent about a 77% of the total watershed area that we're working in. Some of the different sections that were included in our survey was information, just some general stuff about how much miles of road they're responsible for, what the conditions of it are. We had sections on street sweeping, looking at how much was swept, how often, if it's done in-house or through contractors. Any other practices they employ, similar section for leaf litter, and then a section on catch basin cleanouts. So you could really get as holistic of an idea as possible about the type of ongoing work that's being done. For our GIS analysis, During our lit review, there were several studies that noted a strong correlation between canopy cover, overhanging roads, and the concentration of phosphorus in our street sweepings. So we were able to get a high resolution canopy layer and overlay that with all kinds of road data provided by the counties. And then we were able to compare that also with municipal boundaries and a high resolution land use data. So we could assign all of our roads to different land uses. We could overlay the trees on them and then find out what our percentage of canopy cover is, and then slice it up a whole bunch of different ways by townships or counties or municipalities. So we could really figure out what kind of estimates that we could assume. One of the things that we did was we created a term that we used throughout our study, which was effective canopy cover, or ECC. And that was just a measure of the density for roadways within a land use type. So this image on the left here is just a snapshot of what that data looked like. It's from an area in Naperville. You can see the different colored roads represent different land uses that are around it, and then all the green areas with trees indicates the overlapping. So then we were able to calculate our total roads, our tree canopy area, and then the percents for each of those different land uses for, again, all the different cities. And that table is an example of Naperville's specific data. So you can see it's primarily residential area, and also the residential area has pretty high canopy cover compared to the other land uses that they have. So then the last piece of this was our Minnesota Pollution Control Street Sweeping tool. This tool was developed for generating credits for different street sweeping agencies in Minnesota. And it estimates total phosphorus removed by one of 3 different options that you can see there. Either dry mass data from your street sweeping, your wet mass data, or else you can estimate based on curb miles swept. For our study, we ended up using that, that third option because we did not have wet and dry mass data available to us. And unfortunately, that option returns a pretty conservative estimate, mostly due to the fact that the curb mile data is a little less precise. And creators of the tool were trying to sort of strong arm people into using option 1 or 2 to convince them to collect that better data. Also, since it's created as a regulatory tool, they had to maintain, pretty conservative standards given there was a decent amount of uncertainty. And so when we initially used this tool, we were getting values that were shockingly low. Like it was like just a couple of pounds of phosphorus being removed throughout the entire watershed over the span of a year, which based on the literature review we did was just not at all reasonable. So in order to make our use of this tool a little more accurate, we were able to acquire the data that was used to create this tool and then modify it to be more accurate for the curb miles within our specific region. We were able to compare the municipalities in Minnesota that had a similar canopy cover to the municipalities that we are looking at, and then use their specific removal rates to come up with a new overall rate. And then when we recrunched those numbers, we were getting numbers that were much more in line with what it seemed everyone else was getting. So there's a little more, still a decent level of uncertainty in our exact values, but it was much more accurate to what we were looking for. So some of the results of the questionnaire that we sent out, of all of the respondents, all 48 communities and then 2 of the townships that responded have a leaf collection program, which is a good baseline if our goal is to remove phosphorus through leaf collection. 88% of those agencies, however, do not alter their leaf collection for rain. 6% collect before and 6% collect after. Now, that was one of the areas that we thought could be a little bit better because if you've got all the leaves laid out on the curb and then you have the rain fall on those leaves and dissolve all the phosphorus and then wash it into the storm drains, then obviously you're going to get pretty high phosphorus loadings if you're not altering your schedule in any way. That 6% that's collecting before the rainfall is doing perfect. We also only had 30% of our agencies sweep the streets after doing their leaf collection, which is sweeping after the leaf collection is a good way to remove a lot of the mulched up particulate that's left behind and leaves that got missed and any other debris that's still in the street. But we did have 90% of our respondents distribute educational material about composting and mulching, really good ways to completely eliminate phosphorus inputs into our rivers. So I want to draw your attention to this map quick, just showing who our respondents were and a bit of information about it. All those yellow municipalities that you see there were non-respondents. We didn't end up getting any information from them, but all the colored areas show that we really got a pretty sizable chunk of our total area, like I mentioned before. So those solid green municipalities, there's only a handful of them. Those are the ones that are bagging their leaves and then also following up collection with sweeping. And bagging was a question that we asked because that was another way, even if the leaves are in the street and it does rain, if they're in bins and such, then we have potential reductions in that phosphorus leaching if it's trapping that water to begin with. The hatched green areas, which represents most of it, is residents placing their leaves in bags or bins, but without following up with a street sweeping afterwards. The solid purple areas are where residents place their leaves directly on the ground or the street, but they do follow up with street sweeping afterwards. And then the hatched purple is where residents place their leaves directly in the street and there's no sweeping after collection. And then, yeah, there's not too many of those either, but that's also sort of our almost worst case scenario. And then our blue areas where residents place their leaves on the parkway and they do follow up with sweeping. We didn't have any respondents that put them on the parkway and didn't sweep, so we didn't need to include that. But on the parkway, we also felt like was a pretty superior alternative because even if it does rain and leach, then there's the grass and the soil underneath that will help catch a lot of any leachate as well. Some of the other results of our questionnaire broken out a little more is looking at the frequency of street sweepings throughout the year. The graph on the left, we have a number of communities, townships, and agencies that are street sweeping by month and land type, and each different line represents a different type of streets. We have our residential streets, our arterial streets, commercial, industrial, and then central business district. That's sort of how the municipalities break them up. And so for the most part, it's fairly consistent throughout the year. As you can see, the residential and arterial roads do get swept more frequently than commercial, industrial, and central business. And all of them pretty much drop off during the winter when there's not a lot of sweeping going on. And then our graph on the right just shows the distribution of how often people are sweeping. So we've got a bit of a spike kind of in the springtime and it drops off in the summer. And then, as you can probably imagine, most of it takes place during the fall when there's lots of debris on the roads and then drops off quite substantially in the winter. However, even though it does drop off, there's still a few agencies that instead of varying their sweeping, they just sweep at a consistent rate the whole year, even through the winter. You can see there's at least 2 agencies that are sweeping one time through the winter and likely through the rest of the year as well. And we only had 4 agencies that didn't sweep their streets at all, and they were all townships. So that's likely just you know, a lot of like rural roads and unincorporated areas that don't really need sweeping quite as frequently as our fully developed roadways. But this represents just under 9,000 miles of roads, which is quite a bit for everyone to manage. And so it's not an easy task even for them to keep track of it, let alone get to all of it as often as would be needed to completely eliminate any sort of phosphorus. Moving into the results of some of our GIS work, we were looking at which areas would most benefit from optimization of street sweeping. And based on the land use within our watersheds, residential, with the graph on the left, is far and away the largest land use that we have in our watersheds. 66% of the land being used for residential. And then after that, a lot of the others are pretty similarly lowly comprising the rest of it. Commercial being the next biggest with 8%, and then transportation, communication, utility at 5%, along with open space. We have other at 6%, which is a major one, and then ag, industrial, and institutional all make up not a lot of land use. But along with that, we also looked at the effective canopy cover of each of those land types, because we wanted to make sure that if we were advising our agencies to, sweep all your residential areas all the time because it makes up the biggest land use, that we weren't telling them to sweep areas that didn't have any trees, or that we were missing areas that had a lot. Fortunately for our study, we found out that it was pretty simple, that residential areas are the largest area and have the highest percentage of canopy cover. So it's likely going to have the most phosphorus that's leaching there. But some of our other ones, like institutional, is also pretty dense with canopy cover at 13%, but it only makes up, 3 or 4% of our land use. So when we talk about reallocating resources and optimizing our plans, maybe institutional roads are not the best use of our time and effort. Overall, for our entire watershed, our average effective canopy cover is 24%. But there's a lot of variability within that as well, was something we found. So even though our average is 24, and you can see within like the different land uses, it can range from like 4 to 31%. Even residential across different municipalities can range from as high as 62% cover down to as low as 1% cover. So while we were able to make a lot of generalizations, one of the things that we wanted to stress is that management decisions will need to be considered on a agency by agency basis, depending on whatever town you live in. You can't always necessarily just trust the aggregates. So then our final results from our Minnesota Pollution Control Agency tool, and this is where we found out exactly, well, not exactly, but roughly how much phosphorus we are currently removing with the practices we're running. The tool calculates different percentiles. We went with the 25th and the 50th percentile because those were the most realistic ones based on our literature review and expected values. So our 48 communities, 6 townships and agency that represents 77% of our area, we estimate is removing about 6,870 to 12,000 pounds of phosphorus per year across the watershed. So that's quite a bit. That's looking at 127 to 140 pounds per agency per year. Potentially up to 222 to about 250. So there's a pretty good phosphorus reduction already that's taking place. That's a lot less pollution in our rivers. It's a lot less algal blooms, and it puts us, that much closer to keeping our dissolved oxygen in compliance. With that graph on the right, it is broken up into 25 and 50th percentile, and then broken up again by curb and gutter roads, which have storm drains attached on either side, which is, we broke out roads that did not, that would have like the grass gutters or the roadside ditches. And those roads did not make quite as much of a difference as the curb and gutter, because a lot of that runoff goes into the ditches. And while it does drain to the rivers, quite a bit of it does get pooled and it can leach into the ground and into the dirt, and it gets taken up without necessarily going into rivers. So the difference between those two, as you can see, is pretty slight. And then we also have these large outliers up at the top where they are removing way more phosphorus than a lot of the other agencies, especially the ones that you can see at the bottom are removing less than 100 pounds of phosphorus per year. Those large outliers are Joliet and Crest Hill. Joliet just has a ton of roads that they manage. They have really high mileage that sets them above. And then Crest Hill, for whatever reason, they are constantly sweeping their streets as frequently as once a week for months on end. So they're really picking up the slack for everybody else. So this brings us then to our recommendations for optimizing a lot of the current strategies that we have. This first slide is geared more towards the agencies and the municipalities, as they're going to have a larger impact on this process. But there's a couple of caveats that we want to address before diving into these. First of all, there hasn't been an attempt made to attach a reduction total to these recommendations. So we can say that following these recommendations will reduce phosphorus. We can't say exactly by how much. I'm sure in time, if we ran enough scenarios through our different tools, we'd be able to come up with some, but for now, that hasn't really been necessary. These recommendations were also aimed at optimizing our current process. So we wanted to find ways to maximize phosphorus capture, but without necessarily increasing costs and resources required to do so. Because a lot of our municipalities, they've got pretty tight budgets and there's not a lot of wiggle room. So we didn't want to put undue burden on their processes they already have in place. We also want to note that, again, these recommendations should be considered within the context of the individual agency, because their land uses are different, their canopy covers can vary, the resources they have available, and it needs to fit in within their current priorities and what their municipality is currently working on. We also omitted any structural best management practices from this. Structural BMPs are pretty land intensive, and in an urban environment, there's limited space, it's prohibitively expensive, and they also have a tendency to switch between removing phosphorus and then also being a source of phosphorus during different conditions. So we steered away from any structural recommendations. And then the last thing is all of the recommendations in here, especially if agencies are looking at expanding their services, needs to be compared against the scale and marginal cost of wastewater treatment plant upgrades. Because one of the things that we found is that while removing several thousand pounds of phosphorus a year from our street sweeping is quite helpful, it still does not make up the majority of our phosphorus inputs, which come from wastewater treatment plants. So looking at upgrading those plants may end up being easier and potentially more cost-effective way of removing phosphorus, and maybe we just kind of let the leads pile up a little bit. But with all that being said, there's a couple of basic things that we think agencies can do to increase their efficiency. They can start by increasing their street sweeping after leaf collection. You can see even in this photo with the huge pile of leaves the truck is piling up, there's still quite a bit of debris left near the gutters and throughout the road. And it does contribute a lot of phosphorus, especially when it rains after a collection. So following up with street sweeping is a good way to really remove as much as possible from entering the system. The agencies can also increase their sweeping frequency. in the leaf collection months. If we're able to get a lot of those agencies that are sweeping twice a month in the fall up to like 4 times a month, then they can really help remove a lot of that material. To offset, increased sweeping in the fall, we could also have them potentially look at decreasing their frequency, like during the summer when there's not as much organic material that's piling up in the streets. Another option was to increase street sweeping in the spring, because while we don't have the usual like leaf litter falling from the fall, we still get a lot of pollen and flowers and other organic material that's still really high in phosphorus in the spring as well. So having sort of a spike in the spring, a spike in the fall, and then a dip in the summer and winter could be an economic way of optimizing when they're sweeping. Then we also are recommending they prioritize their leaf collection based on the effective canopy cover values that we've calculated. Again, they'd want to look at that city by city as opposed to our overall averages, but they could look at sweeping those residential areas maybe more often, the industrial areas less often, to make sure they are capturing as much phosphorus as they can. And then also using weather forecasting and modifying their schedules to collect prior to rain events to really eliminate that pile of leaves leaching phosphorus in the rain. And while that can be a little bit tricky, especially with residents being used to like a set collection schedule, part of that kind of bleeds into our next one of conducting public outreach campaigns, so they could have an alert service or make it easy to determine when the schedule is going to deviate so they can alert all their residents, but then also reaching out to them with other topics about maybe convincing people to not pile up their leaves right before it rains or right after a collection where they're going to sit out for a long time. And then we also recommended they explore some local ordinances to prohibit the blowing of landscape waste into the roadways. And that's another particular problem in the summer when landscaping crews or other people are out trimming their grass and their shrubs and things get blown into the road. It can cause a lot of difficulties for collection and also block up storm drains, cause localized flooding and all sorts of things. But then moving into some of the recommendations for homeowners in particular, the single best thing that you could do would be to compost leaves. If you can either leave them on your yard or rake them up and compost them, you're removing all of that phosphorus and organic material before it enters the street, the roads, or anything, so you can completely keep it out of the system. If that's not an option for you, we recommend placing your leaves on the curb or wherever you put them the day of or right before your collection day, so that it minimizes the amount of time they're laying in the street, breaking down, and potentially getting rained on. We also recommend bagging or binning your leaves to help capture some of that leachate before it hits the storm drains. And then also installing rain gardens and barrels to help reduce some of that stormwater runoff, so we don't have quite as much flowing into the rivers. And then if you're really passionate about it, you can let your city council know that you are in support of some of these phosphorus reduction strategies, whether it's modifying the collection schedules or having all your residents bag and bin their leaves, or expansions for your treatment plant to help reduce phosphorus. There's lots of different things you can lend your support to that would all be beneficial. The last part of our study includes some opportunities to further our investigation. Right now, we are in the process of increasing our response rate to the questionnaire. There's a couple of key agencies that we really would like the data for that we've been following up with in person. And then we've also resent out our solicitation for responses to all the agencies that did not get back to us. So we can collect a little more data, we can kind of nail down a lot of our recommendations just a little bit more. Another useful thing would be to collect some timeline data on the street sweeping efforts. Things like knowing how long a route takes to complete, what a typical route looks like. Information that would allow us to understand how they are allocating their resources so we can make more beneficial recommendations. We also want to collect dry and wet mass data on street sweepings, because then we can use the more accurate parts of that tool that we talked about, and really get a more exact number on how much phosphorus we're reducing and how much we can reduce in the future. We also found a lot of information that indicates different tree species have different leaching rates. So different species will leach more phosphorus, they might leach it faster. So if we can find out what sort of species we have within our watershed, we might be able to also prioritize our street sweeping efforts based on the specific canopy cover and what is growing there, as opposed to sort of a generalized cover. And then we read a little bit about the ways that phosphorus interacts directly in the river. It undergoes different chemical reactions that impacts the dissolved oxygen directly. So if we can increase some of our data on phosphorus speciation, then we also might be able to factor that into our study as well. All of these items, some of which are underway, are being screened based on their cost, their impacts on improving accuracy, and how they might influence some of the conclusions of our nutrient implementation plan. And that is our final report that this study is underneath of, which is due in December of 2023. So we'll have a lot more detailed and further findings in that report coming out in the next year and a half too. With that, does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Alex. So this is, while people are getting their questions typed into the Q&A and in the chat, if they have any, I think, so there are a couple things for me that stand out. That one reason that I was really interested in this topic and think it's so interesting is that when we think of pollution in our rivers or in our watersheds, a lot of times the first thing that comes to people's mind, unless they're working and doing this every day, you know, but just for the average person, we tend to think of pollutants as in toxins and, you know, maybe spilling of different types of chemicals or things like that, or garbage. And we don't necessarily, as commonly, I think, associate it with something like leaves, because that seems like this is just natural. It's part of nature. I think that that isn't even on a lot of people's radar, that that could potentially cause an issue, you know, and they think they're just cleaning up and oh, it's just leaves, it's natural. So it's good to even have an awareness of this. I really like too what you were saying about, you know, some of the things that the average homeowner can do in terms of if you are cleaning up your leaves and putting them at the curb, to bag them rather than, you know, just piling them up. And of course, it depends on your, you know, who's collecting and what the process is in your community or with your municipality. But that's helpful to know. And then also, because like for me, it kind of made me laugh, because as a gardener, I want those leaves. Like you said, I want all the leaves I can get. I'm composting them. I use them as mulch under my shrubs, and you know, I tuck things in for winter by piling up those leaves when they fall. I don't rake them up, you know, to send them away. I rake them up to use them on site. And so a lot of my neighbors actually know this, and when they bag up their leaves, they just drop them at my house, which is kind of funny. But I always say, like, I want to keep those, you know, the potential beneficial insects that are using that to overwinter, any of our pollinators, whoever, like, I'll keep them, I'll take your leaves. So, you know, that leaf litter kind of thing, it's like, it's not really litter, it's not garbage, but it can be when we have these excess amounts, and you know, they're in the street like this, and with the, like you said, with the rainfall and having all of that phosphorus leaching and getting into our watersheds, I think that's something that a lot of people don't even realize, you know, could be an issue. So it's important to be aware of. And then aside from the individual homeowners, aside from on their own property, maybe anybody who might be involved with their community in other ways, even if they don't work for a municipality, just having the involvement in the community, maybe they're on a committee about sustainability or the environment or anything like that, that maybe this is a topic they could bring up too, or maybe they can look into how does our municipality handle this, and could we maybe improve our practices a little bit, and how easy is it to maybe change some of these things so that we can reduce what we're putting into the system as well. So yeah, I think this was really it's good information to have. I think it's really helpful. We've got a question here where it says, did you assess plastic pollution in the watershed?
No, we haven't assessed any plastic pollution. We've been asked about microplastics before, and the testing for that is pretty complex, so we haven't really got around to it. But also, at this point in time, most of our work is focused on the things that are regulated. So because plastic is not necessarily a measured impairment of our rivers, while it's important, we have not got around to looking at plastics.
Yeah, and that would be an interesting study as well, and definitely important. We've got so much plastic in the waste stream that would be really another important study, and I'm sure there are other places that are doing studies on that. But yeah, in addition to this as a whole separate topic, that's a whole nother,
And we do collect data. In addition to like a lot of the nutrient stuff, we do collect data on like different pesticides and chemicals and heavy metals and stuff. So we have a pretty diverse data set on a lot of different toxins. And there's some that we really like to expand into, like the PFAS that everyone's starting to talk about would be like a really one that we've talked about, but also the testing for that one it's pretty complex, and it's really easy to contaminate your samples too. Like if as a sampler, if you've like worn Gore-Tex in like the previous week, then you can't even go out and sample. So yeah, unfortunately, no plastics. So.
Yeah, good question. Does anybody have any other questions for us? Has anyone done any, I'm curious to know, and you can put this in the chat, I'm curious to know if anyone has participated in any kind of, like a river sweep or a river cleanup, or collecting plastic, litter along the river or creek, or, anywhere near maybe where you live or where you work. And do we also have, I'm also curious about, not just have you participated and helped to do that type of a cleanup, now we've got some other ways that we can help prevent, some different types of pollution entering the watershed. But how many people enjoy our local rivers, either just sitting on the bank and enjoying just the view, or getting out and kayaking or canoeing, or, fishing, or whatever it is that you like to do? Okay, good. Yeah, we've got, the DuPage River Sweep. Fantastic. Yeah. That's I think really interesting too. I always love to hear how people are using these waterways, because a lot of times, even if we don't necessarily get out and get in a kayak or go down the river ourselves, a lot of us who live near one, we really do appreciate them in so many other ways as well. Even if you're not actually out on the water, just driving by them, even, it's calming, when you're stressed out in traffic, and you're, I know for me, when I'm driving past, there are a few different areas, beautiful areas, just, because I live in Kendall County, as I mentioned, that we've got the Fox River running through there. And there's a really nice park right along the river in Oswego, and we've got bike paths, and, all over the area. Even if you're not on the water, there's so many other ways that we still enjoy those waterways. So I think it's really interesting to know all the different ways that people participate, with the waterways in our areas. So yeah, river sweep was mentioned. So we do have people who have participated in that. So let's see. Yeah, so this is true. And this is a good comment too. So composting your leaves on site is fantastic. And it's not always, people can't always, even if you're doing that, don't have the capacity to do all of them, especially if you're on a heavily treed lot. So even if you are using that, that's understandable. You may not have the space to compost that large of an amount of leaves. So yeah, so that can definitely be a challenge, you know, and so bagging them would be nice if we have that that option for our pickup. Let's see, so somebody said, my company will be planning some cleanups as a lead up to World Cleanup Day on September 17th. Fantastic. Yeah, and that's one thing too. So we mentioned it's our Fox River Day. Do you have any more details that you want to share about that, Alex? Otherwise I can, oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
I've been asked to include a little slide about it. So it's our Fox River Day is September 17th this year, and it's a coordinated effort with the Friends of the Fox River, and some other partners are involved. This day offers a chance to celebrate and care for the river. TCF is going to host 2 litter cleanup sites this year. One of them is in St. Charles and one of them is in Yorkville. These events are going to be on the event calendar, TCF's event calendar soon, and you can register there. So until then, if you could please check the event page this mid-August for updates and to sign up for it.
Yeah, thank you. And I did post the link here in the chat where it says you can help keep our rivers clean. And there's a link for the Friends of the Fox Rivers website and their specific page on their website about it's our Fox River Day. So you can get more information there as well. Fantastic. Any more questions for Alex? Or comments? Comments are fine too. If you want to chime in too and share your river experiences, I guess, or I was going to say not necessarily like preferences, but you know, the different ways we like to enjoy them. I know one friend who like takes the most beautiful photos when there's that mist over the river early in the morning when the temperatures change and you still have that coolness and just that kind of fog and mist all over. Let's see, so we do have somebody, okay, so somebody said not seeing the link in the chat. Do you guys see any of the links that I posted? Let me make sure that these were all going to, oh, no, you know what? Here, I'm gonna repost these. I'll do this right now. It looks like it posted, but not to everyone. So I'm gonna go through and share them again. Do those individually right now. You guys are seeing these coming up now. Here comes the one about it's our Fox River Day. There you go. Okay, good. You guys can see them now. Good. Yeah, it looks like there was a setting it was blocking, so you guys couldn't see all of everything that I was posting. So I'm glad. Thank you for telling me that. And there's one for the upcoming events. Okay, good. Fantastic. All right. Well, we're only just a few minutes before 8, so we're actually almost out of time anyway. I'll give you one last second if anybody thinks of another question that they have, and then otherwise we'll go ahead and just log off in a minute. Thank you so much, Alex. I appreciate that. Do you have any suggestions also for anyone who might want more information? Or I know like when we posted the webinar information, that Allie with the Conservation Foundation did post a link for one of the studies that you had mentioned, so people can read that on their own if they're interested in more of that information and about the study specifically and some of the details there. Do you have any other places that you would direct people if they want to participate in, you know, whether it's a cleanup or if they want to learn more or read more? Where would you, what direction would you point them?
Yeah, if they're interested in flipping through our report, it's not too long, and it's like publicly available. If Allie, I know she posted it, but if for some reason you can't find it, you can always just reach out to me and I can send it to people. Otherwise, the DRSCW website may have some things that people can look at. It's just DRSCW.org. It's pretty simple. Yeah, and I guess I would check with your municipality and see, because some of them did have the public outreach materials already present. So I would start by checking with your municipality, see what they have on their website. And if they contract out to like a waste hauler, a lot of them, like Groot, who does garbage, will also do like leaf collection. They also potentially have information on their website that you could look at. And if you really want to get into the weeds on it, I can send you some of the science articles that we were looking at.
If you really want to get in the weeds, call Alex. Do you want to actually, if you don't mind, do you mind sharing your email address in the chat? Maybe if somebody has specific questions about this, that they can contact you. And then also you guys can always contact us at the email address I posted in the chat as well. We've got the info@theconservationfoundation.org. And even if it's a question on an unrelated topic, something different, we can email us at that email address and we can direct you to the right person to help. All right, thank you. Fantastic. All right, thanks everyone for joining us this evening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Have a wonderful night. Thank you. Thanks, Alex.